Okay, we're getting started here. Welcome to the first ever stream. Hey, there's Nick. I see you, Nick. I apologize in advance, Nick. This is going to be different than a Zoom call. I did a little testing yesterday as I was doing the bare minimum to get this whole thing set up, and I found that there's at least a 6-second lag with YouTube, which is something I'm not really used to. So it's a little less like a chat and more like a broadcast, which I'm not sure at this stage in the project is something that's good or bad, which is why I'm doing this mic check session to begin with. I'm not sure if the lag applies to the chat or what. Got my coffee here. And by the way, Nick, I'm ready to get into the beautiful racket style footnotes. I did a little homework on that. I think I've got something for you. For sure, for sure. Let me see here. Let me just fiddle with my mic placement and all this other jazz. Again, this is a little rough, but that's what we signed up for. Let's see here. Let's move this out of the way. Move this here. Okay. Let me do a little navigation. Also, let me grab a link here. YouTube's interface is terrible, I gotta say. It's like so spread out over like 17 different versions of their site. Okay. You know what we're not going to do? We're not going to grab links. We're just going to get into it here. I'm going to load up Beautiful Racket. I'm going to load up CodePen, which this will be the second time I've used CodePen. I think I have a login. Okay, we've got an Untitled CodePen here. Okay, so Nick had emailed me a question in case the recording of this thing works, and this is of use to anyone after we're done being live, about using Pollen to generate footnotes like in Beautiful Racket. Let me see, where's a good one? Where's a good page? Contracts. See, trying to find an example of what we're talking about here. Okay, here we go. On the Beautiful Racket website, we've got Matthew Butterick has this nice little footnote style where you click on the plus sign and it pops up with this, rather than making it an end note or a footnote that you have to scroll to the bottom for, you just click on that plus sign and it's kind of revealed in place there. And how can we use Pollen? The first part of the question is about citations and so forth. How can we use Pollen to handle citations and bibliographies, but then this is kind of more of a presentation issue. How do we present the citations when we reference them, if I understand that correctly? So this is pretty nifty. And I did actually email Matthew about this, because I didn't want to, you know, appropriate his design without any of his input. My thought, my question to Matthew was, should I go ahead and purchase Beautiful Racket at the educational level, which is, if you look at why you should pay, where did he have the prices in here? How to pay for this book. Kind of an educator level for this book would, I felt like, give me the freedom to use this as education. He responded back and said, please don't bother paying. You can use whatever you want in your explanations. It was very gracious of him. And he even gave me a chance to look at some of the Beautiful Racket source code, which I don't think I'll need to refer to for this exercise. But all that to say is I checked with Matthew. He's cool with what we're doing. So here is the example. Now I'm just going to show you from scratch how I would go about doing this. If I saw something on another website that I totally wanted to use. With Pollen, we're usually generating HTML and CSS and that kind of thing. So the first step is figuring out how it works in HTML and CSS and JavaScript, if that applies. So, and by the way, Nick, if I'm talking too quietly, or let me know in the chat. I've got one eye on the chat there. If this is coming through okay on a broadcast quality level. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on this in my browser. I'm going to hit Inspect Element. See what the HTML markup looks like. And I don't know if this is going to be terribly visible on your screen. If I magnify, there we go, that's a little better. Yeah, that would make it a little bigger. Okay. Let's make this window a little bigger. So we've got this paragraph here, it looks like. Here's the footnote I'm trying to zoom in on. I should have right-clicked on that, but I think I will do that. Inspect Element. So it looks like that little plus sign is a span tag. Okay, thanks, Nick. And inside of it, it's got a class on it. There's a little on-click event handler. There's a string. It's basically just a plus sign surrounded by spaces. And then there's, inside that span tag, there's a tooltip inner span there. And that looks like it contains the contents of the tooltip. It looks like he's calling these tooltips. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on this. I'm going to grab the HTML here. I'm going to edit the HTML. I'm just going to, oops, I clicked out of it. Hang on a sec. Okay, I'm going to grab this HTML. I'm going to copy it into my code pen here so that I have an exact copy here. And this is what that HTML will look like without any styling, without any handling. So I know kind of what I'm working with here. There's the plus sign there. And then this is kind of the content of the tooltip, but without any CSS, it's kind of being displayed alongside of everything else, which is what you would expect. Okay, so now we want to know what, we probably want to grab some CSS that applies to especially anything in this span tag. It looks like we want anything applying to the tooltip class, the tooltip visible class, the tooltip inner class. That's probably enough. So I am going to grab that as well. Whoops, I can close this now. styles.css. So you can do a lot with view source. Why is it taking so long? Oop, clicked out of it. Okay. So here's his styles.css file, and I'm digging around for tooltips. There's one. I knew I was close because I happened to glance at the line number when I hovered over it. But so there's the Tooltip CSS rule. I'm going to grab that. There's Tooltip inner. I'm going to grab that. What's down here? And then here's a compound selector for a Tooltip inner inside of a Tooltip visible. I'll leave, this looks like it's styling for links inside of tooltips. I'll leave that for now. I'm going to copy that into the code pen. Now what does that do? Oh, looks like we got something here. We got our plus sign. I think I'm missing something though. Tooltip inner, tooltip inner, tooltip visible. I think there's one more part that I'm probably missing. Okay, here we go. Tooltip hover and tooltip.tooltip visible. So I'm going to grab that one, copy and paste it. Okay, now if I click, now it looks like I'm getting pretty much the result that Matthew is. I'll answer the font question in a sec. Actually, there's a quick way to find that out as well, as I'll show you. So it looks like right now I'm getting pretty much the result that you would get on Beautiful Racket using these CSS selectors and rules styling on this markup. Of course, we can't see it because it's going off the edge of the page. So you'll notice the way that the rest of the site is styled here. These tooltips are always going to come up from, they're gonna keep the plus sign at the lower right hand corner of the tooltip, and because of the generous white space that exists on this site, that tooltip is never going to go off the edge of the page. There's plenty of margin, so even if a tooltip ends up on the far left edge, it's never gonna end up past the edge of the page like we're seeing here. And we can simulate here by adding some additional CSS for the paragraph tag. We can say, let's make it a max width of 20 rem. So that helps a little bit. And then maybe we'll give it a margin left of, 100 pixels. And now we can see the whole thing. Oh, perfect. So that pretty much gets us pretty closely, and we can get into the mechanics of how that works. But different people, this process of digging out other people's design features using view source in your browser is something that is a very useful skill. So that's why I wanted to go through that part of it. If you can figure out the minimum set of tags and CSS rules that are needed to get something done, then you can, kind of dig into how does it work. It's much easier to understand. And the more you do that, the better your brain gets at sifting out what's relevant from what's not relevant. But what I do is I look at the classes and then I dig into the CSS and try and dig out any selectors with their stylings that might apply to that set of classes or identifiers or tags or what have you. Another thing we could do is just to make it a little more similar. And we probably want line height. Default line heights are pretty bad generally. That's better. Okay, so fonts, if you wanted to know a font, the fastest way to know what font something is to right-click on it in your browser. This works in Chrome. Hit Inspect Element. It might not say right away. Why can't I switch this? Well, it might not say right away what the font is, but if you scroll down, it'll burrow down into. You can also click Computed here. It will tell you kind of all the properties that it's computed for that based on all the rules in place. Okay, so here it's saying font family is body text face. So in order to figure that out, you've got to dig into the styles. It's probably loading web fonts up here somewhere. Oh, you know what? I just realized. That is a new font. I've never seen that one before. I wonder if he's using that feature. I know on some of his sites he makes it so you can switch the fonts. Well, I don't know what this is. Let's figure this out. This looks like a base 64, so rather than loading the font separately, it's base 64 encoded right in line in the CSS file. I wonder if I can do a find in here. Yeah, very generic name. He's made it difficult. Maybe this is something he's cooking up new. I don't know what this is. Let me see if I can. Let me just see if I can. Load up the CSS file directly. Then I can use my favorite Control F tools. Command F. Body. Text face. This text face does not appear to have its a given name. Let me think about this. It may be that, it may be that it is clicking on the body tag is usually helpful. Let's see here. Is it in HTML? Font family, body text face. If I hover over that, sometimes in a depending on the browser, I can get, maybe that might be a Firefox feature. Well, I would say kudos to Matthew for successfully obscuring the name of this font. And yeah, looks nice though. I don't know what to say about that. I would guess that he's cooking up something new, and that we'll see it soon. I don't know what that is. I'm going to get back to the. Well, I think Nick. I think he's probably designed it himself. I don't think this is an existing font that exists out in the world. I think this is something. So Matthew is a typographer. He famously has designed all the other fonts that are in use on this site. Until recently, the beautiful racket body text was set in his what was the name of it? It was. I'm gonna close this. It was Concourse. That's what he was using. For those who don't know, these are all Matthew's fonts. I recommend you. I have Triplicate. That's the one that I own, and I love it. Concourse is what he was using for Beautiful Racket, but I'm not seeing this other font on here. I'm guessing that other font is going to appear here. Yeah, I just saw your answer there, Nick. So yeah, I would say it's going to show up here soon. Let's get back to this whole deal. I'm going to erase some of these characters. So it looks like what happens here is you end up with whenever Matthew wants a tooltip, he uses a Pollen tag that gives him that outputs, basically this markup. And this is kind of a strength of Pollen. This is why I like Pollen, is because if you want to do something in HTML that is elaborate and also very fiddly like this, it's easy to, you can make a function to do it all for you, and that function becomes part of your markup. The way this particular feature works is it's basically a CSS trick. The markup starts with span class equals tooltip, but when you click on it, it triggers this. Sorry, I'm strolling around so quick here. It triggers this onClick function that toggles a class on this same span tag that adds the tooltip visible class. So if we look at the CSS selectors, the vanilla tooltip class, display inline, has a white background, and it doesn't seem, and then there's, so that part is there, and then this tooltip inner part is hidden by default. So when when the page first loads, the contents of tooltip inner are hidden. But when tooltip inner occurs inside of an element that has its tooltip visible class, it becomes visible. So clicking on here adds the tooltip visible to the parent span tag, causing the tooltip inner part to become visible. And then there's these transform origins that cause, well, the inner part has this absolute positioning that positions it relative to its parent element, I believe is how that works. And then at the moment it becomes visible, it uses the right bottom corner as its transform origin point. I understand CSS just well enough to understand, I wouldn't be able to quickly write this myself without a lot of Googling, but I understand what it's doing. It's kind of like reading versus writing a language. So, and when you hover over the outer tooltip part, you get this kind of fade into color reversal here. So it changes the background, it changes the foreground color, changes the opacity, and then there's this transition duration so that it takes a fifth of a second to switch between the two. So now we know what HTML we need to generate in order to get this effect. So let me fire up Dr. Racket here. Did I do the right one? I just recently installed Racket 7.7, but I haven't fully migrated all my packages yet. So I want to stick with 7.6. 7.7 came out yesterday or the day before, I think. Okay. Let me just kind of mock up this markup. Let me just take here. I don't care about the enclosing paragraph tag necessarily, but I do want that span tag, which is down here, span. Okay, let me just kind of grab these, and I'll bring them in here. just make it this a comment so that I can kind of, so we've got this span tag. I'm just going to kind of pick it apart here. And then we've got another span tag inside of that one with its own class. I'm going to simplify this a little bit. I don't necessarily care that there's a big link inside of here. I'm just going to call it, just use the inner text of what he had there. And then I'm going to, then there's the closing tags. So a great skill that you'll want to learn with Pollen is translating in your head between this HTML style, XML style tags and closing tags with their attributes and their child elements. Between that and what in Racket or Lisp would be called X expressions. And I'll give you an example of that here. You know, I could just, what this would look like would be, I'm going to quote a list here. Span. An empty span tag in an X expression would look like this. Basically, the span keyword in the front there, and no elements and no attributes. If we wanted to add attributes, attributes are a list of pairs or a list of lists. You could add that like class. Oh, yeah, that's right. Thank you, Catalina. Class. Yeah, it's hanging up on me. Okay, there we go. Class. Tooltip. So that's an empty span tag with a class. I'm going to define example. So I'm defining a variable or a binding that matches this, and I'm going to put this last closing tag. We're going to get a lot of parentheses on here. It's part of the territory. You learn to live with it. So example is now this kind of quoted list here. To make this a little faster, I'll use base, and then I'm going to require Pollen template, which gives us a handy function, which I'll show you in a sec. We're going to play this, and now I'm down here in my interactive prompt at the bottom. Let's see if example is what we said it is. Yes, it is. Now, the Pollen template class here gives us this very handy function called arrow to HTML. This hyphen greater than sign is an HTML, and we're going to say example. So it is escaping the quote marks inside there, but you can see that it's converting this between an X expression and the HTML output. And this is the most common way that your tag functions in Pollen will work, is that they will produce this structure right here, and then in your template you use this HTML function to convert that into actual HTML, the string of HTML that ends up in your web page. So we've got to start here. We've got an X expression that has a part of what we want to do is build this thing up until we, are matching what we see here. Looks like we have another element here, on click. Well, another thing I like to do is in Racket, these parentheses you can actually use interchangeably. You can use the round parentheses, you can use square brackets, and you can use curly brackets. That is in the default Racket syntax. So when we're talking about attributes, I like to use these square brackets to differentiate the attributes. That way I can keep them straight in my mind. There's no semantic difference between them in the default Racket syntax. So I can say on click. I see your note there, about the latency. I did set the ultra low latency yesterday when I was testing. I forgot to set it today. So we're probably sitting with about an 8-second lag right now based on what my results I was getting yesterday. I set it to ultra low yesterday and I got it down to 6 seconds, which I understand is as good. I mentioned this on Twitter, and a friend of mine said, yeah, with broadcast that's typically as good as it gets. Usually with broadcast you end up with some multiple of 3 seconds in as lag. So yeah, you're right, I can't adjust it while streaming. I see that it's grayed out for me here, so unfortunately we've ended up with an extra 2 seconds of lag. I would appreciate your feedback after we're done here if you find this format of me talking the whole time and just watching the chat, if that's annoying or helpful. So we've got this on-click attribute. I'm going to copy and paste this string of text in there. So this is just a string here. It just happens to contain JavaScript, but that's neither here nor there as far as Pollen or Racket are concerned. It's just an X expression, and that's the string content of that attribute. I can also hit enter here and get some nice indentation. And then we have the content of the span tag, which is a string containing a plus sign surrounded by spaces. So let's just check that. I could hit escape P to get my previous expression. And so I'm just kind of building this up. Now I can see what I'm aiming for up here, and I'm just making it happen here in this example X expression. Let's see. Then we have this inner span. So I'm going to hit enter here to try and combat the rightward drift that happens so often in a Lisp. Rather than closing the span tag here, I'm going to start a new span tag. Yeah, I suspected as much. Nick saying there that this might scale better with a larger audience, so I do suspect as much. I just never done it before, so I want to make sure I'm not just assuming. Span. Now this one has a class of Tooltip inner. And no other attributes, and then we'll kind of, I'm just going to copy this here. And okay, so that closes that span tag. If I hit enter, do another one that closes that span tag, and then this last one here closes the definition. So now we're getting, for demonstration, looks like I have unwittingly pasted in some non-printing Unicode characters, which is looks like used for hyphenation. That's what that garbage is. If I just retype the word demonstration, I can effectively remove those. Oh, they're still in there. What's going on with that? I don't understand that. Maybe I need to delete a bigger portion of the string. Oh no, silly me, I've edited my comment and not the actual word. Let's just retype it in there. And then of course the comment has no bearing on the actual program, as it should be. Okay, there we go. Fix that typo. So we have something approaching the minimum viable example that we had created over here. So now we can create a function that will produce this for us. There's a lot of ways to write tag functions. Pollen has some conveniences, but I'm going to do it the raw Racket way. I'm going to say tool. I'm going to call this tag tooltip. The format for defining a tooltip or a function in Racket is you open with define, and then the name of the function. You have another form here, which is open another parentheses, the name of the function, a list of arguments or sub-expressions, and then close that, and then you have the body that is evaluated for the function. So right now I have a function that is just called tooltip that takes no arguments, and it returns the value true. When you call your tag function specifically from your Pollen document, let's see, how involved do we want to get here? I touched on this a little bit in the past session. If you use this dot notation and create and then follow it with this, basically you can now call tooltip with any. This is what makes the function variadic. So you can now call tooltip with any number of arguments, and those arguments will be rolled up in this in a list called elements. So if I'm going to rerun that, and I'll call tooltip with no arguments, I get an empty list. If I call tooltip with 3 arguments, I'm going to get a list of all the arguments. So this is this kind of way of defining a function is probably the best way to do a tag function in vanilla Racket, just because you want your tag function to be able to accept any number. It may have any number of arguments in it, depending. And I can get into that in a bit, but I'm trying to think of what's the best way to cook up an example. Let me save this. We're gonna start a new Pollen project. Code. I have a sandbox. Where are you, sandbox? There you are. I'm going to call you. Why don't I just start I'll call it tooltip. I'm going to save this as my pollen.racket. I'm going to start a new document or program or file, because the distinction is blurred. We're going to do this lang pollen. This is going to be our example document. This is our example. You'll notice that the Racket IDE notices the lang line, and it's even highlighting our syntax differently, because it knows that in lang pollen everything defaults to just being a string. So this is our example, and we want to be able to have a tooltip, and we're going to use the special lozenge character, which you can use. You can insert with this button up here, or you can, on a Mac, hit Alt-Shift-V, or you can change that to be a different character, but I won't get into that now. So our function is called tooltip, and this should be a hidden tooltip. Now we're going to have problems with this, so I'll show you what they are. I've mentioned these before, but I want to save this file. I want to call it example.html.pm for pollen markup. Okay. If I run this, this is the X expression that Pollen generates. A root tag with a string containing, this is our example, and then a tooltip. We can see that this didn't really call our function. well, I could see that. It's obvious to me. The reason is that we did not provide this function to be available to outside programs. So I'm going to do this. I'm just going to hit provide tooltip. Now I'm going to get either an error or, I better save that. I'm going to get either an error. Yeah. Oh, the kids have joined me. Sorry?
My show is not just not working.
Your show is not working?
Uh-huh.
Oh, Mommy will help you. No problem. Okay, we got an error here because we have a contract violation. It didn't tell me what it expected, and that's because I have omitted debugging information in here, but I can see why I'm getting an error. The document that Pollen produces has to be a valid X expression. And so a valid X expression is either a string like this, that's a valid X expression, or a list that starts with a symbol optionally followed by a list of attributes, which as I mentioned earlier is a list of lists, like, you know, like we have up here, class equals tooltip, or and, you know, optionally followed by the attributes, and then any number of X expressions as elements, which can be either tags or strings. So a list that starts with a string is not a valid X expression. It can't be converted into HTML. It's like the HTML equivalent of this would be what would it be? It would be like this. Hello. That doesn't make any sense. And so you can think of an XML, or I'm sorry, an X expression as kind of a Lisp expression that can reasonably and straightforwardly be converted into HTML. My tooltip function only provides, it just regurgitates a list of whatever arguments was given. What you want to do is, I just realized I've been conflating X expressions with tagged X expressions, but that's a distinction I can get into later. So we want this function to produce this kind of structure, like example. So the way I at least know it's calling my function because here's that list that the tooltip function generated. What I will do is I'm going to require bracket list to get access to the first function, and I'm just going to put first elements just by way of example, and run that. I'm going to go back to here and do this. Oh yeah, save all files is fine. Now it works because it's, rather than spitting out a list, it spits out the first element in the list, which happens to be a string. So we're getting that string basically right back at us. I wonder if I have, I don't know if I do, I don't think I have the HTML function provided in here yet. Yeah, I don't have it. I gotta require it. That gives me the HTML function, and this is what our HTML would look like. The result of the Pollen markup document is contained in the variable doc. So that's what this doc refers to. Pollen automatically defines that variable for me as the. So I'm going to try and cut to the chase here. We have this is our tooltip function. These are the elements. What I want is for the elements, which is, you know, anything that's inside these curly brackets, to be hidden inside a tooltip. And I know from looking at my desired output here that I've got to generate this this kind of a thing here. So if you've gone through the tutorials, you've probably run into this unquoting syntax. What you do is you start with a magical backtick symbol. So the result of this function is going to be this expression right here. And I'm just going to start filling it in. We know that we want the backtick allows us to escape out of here and insert variables in place, or the results of expressions in place. So I'm going to put a span. I'm just going to copy this jobber right here down into here. And what if I just put that like that? That's not really doing anything for me. I'm not actually using any variables in here. It's always going to be the same. Let's just save that. Let me run this again. Same document. Oh, what did I do? I didn't finish off my function here or something. Oops. I already have that parentheses there. Okay. Save that. Run it again. So this is now the result of our doc expression. And convert that to HTML. I forgot I got to re-require it again. It's escaping the quotes here. I can I think I can display. That will make it a little more friendly to look at. So now we're starting to get the HTML markup that we want out of this, that sort of matches what we had in our CodePen. In order to actually truly dynamically insert, the last step is to add this bit in. I'm going to close that, or erase that. And now, instead of using this text, what I want is, I want to get the text out of elements. Now let me show you. I can, the quick way to do this would be the way you escape out. So since I'm using this backtick, this allows me to use a comma inside the expression, and then any expression I want. And I'm going to call the function first on the list named elements. Okay, so this is going to dynamically insert the first element of whatever's in this list into this spot in the tagged expression. I'll save that. And now I'm going to change this. Well, this is already an example text, so we're going to run it. You'll notice that in the expression I'm getting the actual text of my tooltip tag inside here. And I can display. Keep forgetting that. I should just be requiring it. I'll show you a way to handle that situation. But there. Now I'm getting all this fiddly HTML markup out of Pollen just by using this tag function. And the next step here is we're going to want an HTML template. Templates are a little bit different. They're not exactly, let me just okay, let me create a new terminal window here. Whoops. Well, I'm just going to reuse this one. What do I call this? Tooltips. see I've got two files in here, my example document and my pollen.racket file. I'm going to create a new file called template.html. Let me bring that editor window over here. It's been a long time since I've created an HTML file from scratch. So, lazy person that I am, I'm just going to Google it. I'm going to copy and paste it from a window here. I just Googled this. Okay. This has already got a style sheet in it, which is great. I'll leave the title as an example for now. Templates are a little weird in Pollen. They're not exactly Racket files, but what you do is they're just kind of text files that you can use Racket syntax in them. I am going to... how am I going to do this? You use the Pollen escape character, HTML doc. Okay. Write that. So I'm doing the same thing in here. I'm just calling that toHTML function from within the template and using this doc variable, which is always defined for us as whatever the current document is. It's the result of, let me get rid of this. It's the result of this root expression here. It's going to convert that to HTML. This is going to fall down for a subtle reason, which is that I want to also provide the HTML function to out from this pollen. That'll make it so that I have to require it inside the template. But generally, in Racket, if you're going to use a function, it has to be either defined in the same file or brought in from somewhere. Sometimes you get magic definitions like doc that are brought in for you, and sometimes you got to bring them in yourself. You just kind of have to read the documentation to know which are which, and you just get a feel for it. But the other way I could have done it was at any point up here I could have said require pollen template. But since I've done it in my pollen.racket, I've required it here and then re-provided that one function out, then I don't need that line really. Okay. Oops. Okay. I think that will work. Let's go back to here. Draco Pollen start a web server. Okay, I can go to that spot. I'm going to bring that window over here. Example.html, it's going to generate that for us. Okay. If I do show page source on this, I'm getting the correct markup. It's just that I don't have any CSS to go with it. And that is because the template file refers to a style.css file that doesn't exist. So let's make it. It says it can't find style.css. I'm going to break that quick. I'm going to start a text editor with style.css. I'm going to grab out of the code pen that we started earlier all these rules. Just paste them in there. I'm going to tweak something here. I'm going to change this to be body so that it applies to the whole body element. Now I'm going to go back and restart my local web server. Go back to the example document and reload. Of course, we can't see it because it looks like our plus sign is a little lopsided there. I think that is because, I wonder why that is. I might need to use non-breaking space entities there or something like that to avoid the problem of not having that space do its job, that trailing space. But we're getting closer. We'll change this so that we're going to make this be, the margin be make this margin be, 300 pixels all the way around. Go back to here, reload. There's a hidden tooltip. Again, why is this plus sign not being used? Inspect element. What's actually turning up in the browser? What is the browser seeing? Okay. Well, there is a space sign being shown in there, but if I edit this as HTML and I use we're going to do non-breaking space entities plus non-breaking space. Now I get a plus on both sides, so that might be what we need to do there. So there it is, basically working. We now have a tag function in our pollen.racket file that lets us put a tooltip in our document without, it's a lot easier to type this in your text editor than it is to type all this stuff, which if you were using Markdown, you would have no choice but to type out the HTML equivalent of this in every single time you wanted to do it. Maybe some people would handle that by using some kind of a snippet library or Keyboard Maestro or something, but then if you ever change the way you want to present it, you've got to change it in all your documents, whereas with Pollen you can, by doing it this way, you can just change the function and it re-render your documents. I was using the Pollen web server here to serve up our file. The other way to do it is to use the Reiko Pollen command. Reiko Pollen render example.html, and that will look for the source. Well, it's cached, it hasn't changed, so it just basically pulled the latest version from the cache. It was pretty quick. If I delete, well, let's reset the cache. Do it again. This is how it would render from scratch. And 960 milliseconds, not blazingly fast, but not too shabby. It found the .pm file and said, okay, that's probably the source for this, and rendered it into HTML. Would I please be willing to share these example files? Absolutely. This is part of what I was going to do during this setup video. I want to basically do the bare minimum, create the repo that I'm going to be using in the main sessions. And then I can just do that right now. So let's go to GitHub. And I'm going to create a repository. And then you can clone it and use it. Is it this easy? I have to think through this every time I do it. We're going to call this, I'm just going to call it Cookbook. I'm calling it Cookbook Pollen because I have an idea in the back of my head that I might want to create other kinds of cookbooks as well for other tools that I enjoy using. Like Fossil is one. Do I want to initialize? I don't want to initialize it with really anything. Okay, that looks good. Bunch of pollen recipes. Now I'm going to create a new project in my, the way I have my local laptop set up. I use ZSH for my shell, and I have a CDP command that auto-completes for anything in my code, any subfolder of my code folder. So if I make your pollen, well, I'm going to do cookbook pollen. Is this how? No, that's not what I want to do. I want to clone it right here. Git clone. I have cloned it. You are darn right about that. CD cookbook pollen. Now I can actually, I'm going to copy. The way I want to structure this thing is I want to have a separate, let me think about this. I can always change it later. I think I'll just, eventually this cookbook is going to be, this is going to be a pollen project, and it's going to have lots of chapters, and each chapter is going to be doing a recipe, showing how to do some technique of some kind, and some of them might be pretty elaborate. So I think what I'm going to do, but I want it to be, I want all the elaborate things to work without stomping on each other, but I also don't want to make this thing too complicated to where people can't understand it when they first download it and look at it. So I'm going to think about that a little bit, but I think what I'll do to begin with is, well, very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my favorite open source permissive license ever in the whole world, blueoakcouncil.org. This is my favorite permissive license. It's the one that I think people should use instead of MIT or Apache. It is very short and easy to read, and it covers, even despite that, it covers a lot of things that MIT and Apache don't cover. So what I'm going to do, actually I'm going to dig into, just so that I get it the way I want it, Racket relicensing. This is a license.md. Okay, so that's all I did there. Okay, so I'm just going to grab this stuff here. mvim license.md. Paste it. gonna do a little light reformatting. I tend to hard wrap things on or about column number 100. Vim makes it easy for me to do that. Makes it easy to read in tools that don't soft wrap stuff for you. Sort of noise. Okay. So there's my license. And I'm going to close that. And then I also wanted to grab my contributing file. Because one thing that Blue Oak does nicely that other licenses don't is it nicely handles the case of what do you do when there's multiple contributors? How do you know that they're actually all licensing their changes according to your license? MIT assumes that there is kind of a parent institution that everybody who's contributing works for, and that the copyright of the work is held by the institution, but that is almost never the case in reality in open source projects, or only in a small percentage of cases. So I'm going to mvim contributing.empty, and I'm going to paste this in here. So what I tell people is, if you're going to give me a pull request, include a commit that adds your name to the copyright line in license.md. And then when people do that, when they add their name in here, they include themselves in the definition of such clauses as every contributor licenses you to do everything with this software that would otherwise infringe that contributor's copyright in it. So that way you kind of have a clean record of people saying, yes, everything I contribute, I have copyright in it, and I am licensing it according to the same terms that everything else in this repo is licensed under. So then I don't have to deal necessarily with contributor license agreements and that sort of thing. And it's never going to really matter. You never expect it to matter. I never expect that I'm going to get legal action. But the legal aspect of open source programming is kind of a nerdy. It's part of open source work in my mind, and I find it interesting. So I've done that, and now I'm going to copy sandbox. Where am I at here? Pollen, sandbox, tooltip, pollen.racket. I'm going to copy that one. I'm going to copy. Well, I should just copy the whole thing, really. So now I have the example document. I have the style sheet. I have the pollen.racket. I have the template. And what I'm going to do is rename the template, because here's the thing. I don't want my repository to include the HTML output files. That seems redundant. So what I'll probably do is just copy the git ignore out of my local yarn project. No, not that one. My notepad project. I'm going to copy that git ignore here, and then I'm going to just tweak it. So this is from another Pollen project I have. I have it set to ignore all kinds of crazy stuff, like backup files and swap files created by my text editors, HTML files, LaTeX, PDF files, .out files. This is .out and .aux and .log and .xml. You end up with a lot of those when you start using LaTeX to generate PDFs. TOC, I think that's another LaTeX type of artifact. I don't need this because I don't have a util directory. compiled. I definitely don't want that. I don't need that. That doesn't exist anymore. That it will come in handy. Don't need that. Don't need that. Don't need that. Don't need that. So that should do. And then the caveat there is that get ignore is going to ignore our template file, which we have here. And Pollen has a workaround for this. It's the .p file extension. So mvim, or no, I want to move template.html to template.html.p. And that way, this file will not be ignored by the Git repo version control, but Pollen knows to strip off the .p file extension when looking for templates. If that doesn't make any sense to you, it will once you've done, if you do a tutorial, you know, Pollen tutorials that use templates, and if you use Git, which I'm assuming you do. I think for now I'll just go ahead and let's see here. Okay, that's fine. So we've got all these new files in here. I think that's ready to go. I might change how this is organized later on. So if you do clone this repo and then later you clone it again, don't be surprised if it looks vastly different, especially the more Pollen time sessions that we have. Okay, now we'll do git push origin master. Hang on a sec here. Okay. Let's check and see if it worked. There we are. Cookbook Pollen repo. So those for now contain exactly what we have edited this afternoon. And basically all we did was use view source in the browser to grab kind of what the markup in CSS we needed, and drop those into our Pollen project. And then, you know, the difficulty, the head scratcher at first with Pollen is learning how to create these expressions, these tagged X expressions that are convertible to HTML. The virtue of using tagged X expressions is that, you know, while they exist in this form, you can manipulate them with relative ease, rather than ending up with a string of HTML and then trying to do HTML parsing for things that you want to change. You can treat it as a list, and you can recurse down it. You can use helper functions that Pollen provides to pick out certain elements and change those and transform them. And we'll probably be getting into that kind of stuff in the main session. And in the one I do on Thursday night, assuming that all the feedback you know, is that this is a fine way to go about doing this is getting into the citations and the bibliography. And I'll probably be looking at how LaTeX handles those things and just kind of taking a bit of a cue from that in terms of what you want it to look like in your document. And there's a lot of different ways to handle it. You know, you could be defining these citations in a separate file or right in your pollen.racket file. When people say, can Pollen do citations of bibliography, it's kind of like asking, can C++ do citations of bibliography? Can Python do citations of bibliography? It can. It's a programming language. It can do anything. You could have a tag function that grabs the content of a web page, for example, and puts it in your document output. You can generate images. We had a question on the Pollen users list recently. That was really cool discussion. Let me go there. Pollen users. Somebody wanted to know about creating diagrams in line. I don't know why this is taking so long. Just go here. Graph viz diagrams in line with Pollen. This is in Matthew's Pollen users repo that is solely used as a discussion area. This fellow here, Philip, wanted to know if he could use Pollen to generate graph viz diagrams, and so are we, and Matthew chimed in with pretty much, you know, the keys to the kingdom as far as how to get that done. So, you know, they cooked up an include diagraph function, tag function, that would interpret this dot input that is used by the GraphViz library and save it as a PNG file, and then include an image tag with that PNG file in it. I'm going to clip over to the GraphViz library. You can see kind of what those would look like. I actually could. I don't know if I have that library installed. Let me just pull this window over here. I'm going to close this one, which is going to result in source control highlighting some white space changes. If I type require GraphViz in my new program, oh yeah, I don't have it yet. No problem. Go here, install package. It might take a little while, and I noticed last time I had a Pollen office hours session, I did an example showing a build of a project of mine, and it took an embarrassingly long time. I realized later that oh, I must not know what that is. Oh, racket graph is. That's what it is. The reason it took so long was because I'm simultaneously streaming and my screen, and it's transcoding and all this stuff. So a healthy amount of my CPU usage was being taken up by the streaming, and I was instituting a pretty processor intensive process, I guess I would say, on my computer, and it took a lot longer than normal. When you do it when you're not streaming, it doesn't take nearly as long. So that is going on in the background. Nick, let me know if you have any other follow-up questions. Now it's actually going to compile everything. notice my CPU usage is a lot higher up here. Basically, though, you can call these functions with this dot notation, and you'll get these diagrams. Racket has a lot of stuff like that. I've been playing with a library that dynamically, it emulates an NES audio circuit board and dynamically composes songs. That might be part of Pollen Cookbook at some point in the future. For creating a podcast out of a book. Awesome. Which you can do in principle by having your tag functions spit out strings of text that are intelligible to a text-to-speech processor that will then give you back an MP3 file, and you can then create an RSS feed that includes the MP3 file, and bingo, you have a podcast. Okay, where are we at here? Almost there. One other thing I guess I will mention is that with this, maybe I'll come back to this for just a second. This function, this is going to be a little slower now because of this going on in the background. It grabs the first element only out of the tooltip function. I should create another function, but if I were to add double line breaks inside this tooltip function the way it's written now, it probably would only grab the first line, because it treats each line and each separate line break as a separate element when it creates this list. So that's something you might run into if you tinker with it. Spectacle to snap your main windows. Yeah, that's a good idea. I actually have Spectacle on here, I believe. I just haven't gotten proficient at using it. Yeah, that's a good point. I will tinker with that and make sure that I come up with some acceptable tiling setup for the main session. I typically I'm in the habit of using Spectacle to full screen things without actually using max full screen mode. But I haven't really ever delved into using it for tiling all my windows properly, because I'm not really happy with its grid model. It's either quadrants or thirds, and that doesn't seem to be quite granular enough for me for what I normally do. I probably want to be able to have like a grid that snaps to 9ths or 16ths of the screen or something like that. And that is a good tip. Coming up on an hour and a half here. We'll see if this finishes by the time we're done. Seems like it's got this package has a lot of dependencies, but yeah. Command Control Shift. Oh, yeah. You know, it's funny because the other thing is that I'm not using Shift. Vim is interpreting some of these. I think I need to come up with. See, I can do Command Control Shift for some of these. I can do the left and right, but I cannot do up and down. I think Vim isn't intercepting those, or there's some kind of collision happening there. So we're coming up on an hour and a half here, and I think I probably will call it quits here soon. I don't know if I'll wait for this to finish. Oh, it did finish. Yeah, looks like it will work. And the nice thing about Racket 2 is you can oftentimes any picture results, any graphical results are kind of first-class citizens in the REPL. So if well, that one generates a structure, but you can create a picture here. Dot. Command not found. Well, it'll be fun when we get to this for me to figure out all the steps. I'm not sure why. I wonder if it requires me to have a command on my path. That's kind of annoying. What I can do is, this should work. Digraph picked. Yeah, it's not creating that dot. Well, that's what I get for not rehearsing. I will, I think I'm going to call it good here. Let me know if you have any other thoughts on my streaming setup. Seems like this could be workable. Seems like I will want to remember to click ultra low latency next time I start the stream. Add that to my checklist. And I will want to double test everything that I do in Racket before I do it, before I demonstrate it. And I'll want to come up with a good tiling setup so that all the things that people might want to refer to are on the screen at the same time without me flipping back and forth a lot. So cheers, everyone. All two of you. I have 2 people at the moment. I think it was up to 3 at one point. So I'll keep you posted, and we'll see you on Thursday.